Prince William went on Heart FM and got into a debate about scones. That is the whole story at its core. A radio segment. Cream first or jam first? The debate that Britain has been having for decades and will presumably continue having indefinitely. William revealed that Queen Elizabeth always put the cream on first. The hosts brought out trays of scones and got genuinely invested in arguing about it. William laughed throughout with the ease of someone who does not need to manage how he comes across in the moment, and the clip spread across social media because it was exactly the kind of thing that people like sharing. A future king, relaxed, funny, talking about something that has absolutely nothing to do with institutional weight or public duty or the monarchy as a concept. Then, not long afterward, Meghan's As Ever brand posted polished footage featuring warm scones, jam, cream, and a carefully arranged British tea setting. And the internet, as it tends to do, noticed immediately.
Meghan Markle's creepy Prince William stalking has just been uncovered, and what it shows you is that she is still completely obsessed with the other brand.
Tonight we are going through the scone moment, what it says about the wider contrast between these two public presences in 2025, the William and Aston Villa phone call that became its own separate viral story in the same week, and the broader structural question that the scone comparison illustrates about where the Sussex brand actually sits 5 years after the departure that was supposed to mark its independence. That question is worth taking seriously, because it is not really about scones. It is about whether a brand built on the premise of independence from the royal world has found its way to genuine independence, or whether it is still, in the ways that matter commercially, tethered to the story it was supposed to have left behind. Let's start with the Heart FM clip, because the context matters considerably more than the headline suggests. William was there for a light segment about one of Britain's most reliably divisive questions. Does the cream go on before the jam, or the jam before the cream? For anyone outside Britain, this requires brief context. The Cornish position is jam first, then cream. The Devonians insist on cream first, then jam. Both positions are held with conviction that suggests they have never seriously examined the question from the other side. These positions have been held with genuine conviction across generations and argued in complete sincerity at parish fetes and tea rooms and comment sections for as long as anyone can remember. It is also, as cultural controversies go, entirely harmless, which is exactly what makes it function so well as a public moment for a royal who is trying to communicate approachability. William revealed that Queen Elizabeth always put the cream on first. He said it with affection and with the specific confidence of someone citing an authority that is both beloved and genuinely beyond challenge. The late Queen's preference is not an argument you can easily win against. The host challenged him anyway. Trays appeared. The debate got pleasantly chaotic, with people talking over each other and waving scones around, which is the correct atmosphere for this particular conversation. William laughed throughout in a way that did not look managed or performed. He was having fun. It was entirely visible, and that visibility is what made the clip work in the way it did. He came across as approachable, quick, and completely at ease. The specific register of public presence that generates the kind of coverage this clip generated. Warm, widely shared, broadly liked across audiences that do not normally spend time following royal stories. The clip spread because it was funny, and because William in it looked like a person rather than a public figure performing personhood. The clip spread. Major British outlets picked it up. Royal fan accounts reposted it. Comment sections filled with the cream versus jam debate being relitigated in real time, with people invoking regional loyalties and grandmother's recipes and their own strongly held positions. It was, by every available social engagement metric, a very effective piece of public presence. And it was effective precisely because it was not designed to be effective. It was designed to be fun, which is a very different thing, and the difference shows in how it lands. Then, Meghan's As Ever account posted the scones content. Warm lighting, elegant table setting, cream, jam, carefully arranged British tea aesthetic. Polished and curated and clearly considered in terms of what it was communicating visually. The timing immediately attracted comment. William's scone conversation had been generating positive coverage and social engagement for several days. The As Ever post arrived into that ongoing conversation, carrying the same central prop, the same food tradition, the same cultural register, just translated from a lively radio argument into polished lifestyle brand imagery.
thing is, Angela, there's nothing British about this woman. There's nothing royal about this woman. When she was actually here, she hated.
If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture that other channels skip, the like button helps us reach more people. It costs nothing and it matters. Now let's be precise about what critics were actually arguing, because the online conversation went in several directions simultaneously, and it is worth separating the different threads. The most basic argument was about timing, that Meghan's content appeared while William's scone segment was still generating active social coverage, and that the overlap in subject matter was too specific to be explained as coincidence. Scones are not a general background feature of lifestyle content. They are a specific British cultural reference that had just been attached very visibly to a major positive public moment for the future king. The As Ever post arrived into that specific ongoing conversation, not into a neutral space. A second argument was about aesthetic register, that the presentation style of the As Ever scone footage leaned heavily into classic British tea culture. The carefully arranged, elegantly lit, refinement signaling visual register associated with traditional British prestige and, by extension, with the aristocratic and royal world that prestige is connected to. Critics pointed out that this aesthetic choice sits in interesting and specific tension with the story the 2020 departure was supposed to tell and had been telling publicly ever since.
Charming interview with Prince William where he revealed finally that the late Queen Elizabeth II had decided the conundrum when it comes to the great British tradition of how to have your scone.
The public narrative around leaving royal life was explicitly about building something new and independent, something that did not depend on the visual language of the institution being left behind. The As Ever scone footage looked, to its critics, like exactly that visual language, translated from a palace context into a commercial one. A third argument was more structural and has been accumulating across the years of As Ever's existence. Critics argue that a pattern exists in which the brand generates its most significant coverage and engagement not when it is doing something entirely its own, but when it intersects with royal themes, royal imagery, or stories involving specific members of the royal family. The scone moment fit that pattern precisely. The item that drove the most discussion was not the product itself, but its relationship to a William moment.
William, what do you do? Think carefully.
I love that I'm the authority on scones. I can only tell you what I learned from my grandmother, and she had the cream on first.
Oh, she did?
Yeah. She does.
Okay, there you go.
That is the Devonian way.
Cream on first, jam on top.
If that observation is accurate, and the evidence of the previous several months of As Ever coverage suggests it largely is, it presents a specific and uncomfortable commercial reality. The brand is most visible and most discussed precisely when it is closest to the thing it was supposed to be independent from. Independence, in this case, appears to reduce rather than generate attention. That is a commercially uncomfortable observation for a brand that was explicitly positioned as an exercise in independence. Subscribe to Palace Insider and tell us your take in the comments. Deliberate strategy, coincidence, or something in between. The Angela Levin dimension adds a specific layer to this conversation. Levin, who has spent years researching and writing about both the Sussexes and the wider royal family, offered her reading of the As Ever scone content with characteristic directness. In her assessment, the return to British-inspired tea culture imagery, the refined presentation styles, the floral arrangements and elegant service settings, these choices, recurring as a consistent pattern rather than as occasional references, suggest an ongoing connection to the imagery of an institution the brand is theoretically independent from. Levin's broader argument, which she has made across multiple contexts and which she returned to in the aftermath of the scone moment, is that Meghan found aspects of the royal hierarchy genuinely difficult to navigate. Specifically, the parts of that hierarchy that placed Catherine in a formally senior position as the wife of the heir, regardless of individual celebrity or media footprint. Whether that argument is accurate or represents an interpretive overreach on Levin's part is a question the audience can assess for themselves.
Cream first, jam second. Within hours, Meghan Markle had decided she was going to use that as a little stunt, for her business was never.
What it does is locate the scone conversation inside a longer and wider debate about the relationship between the Sussex brand and the royal world it technically left behind. The commentary also touched on some product promotion details in the same period. specifically references to family members' preferences in a marketing video. Critics argued that drawing personal family details into commercial product promotion sits in tension with the Sussex household's long-standing public emphasis on privacy. Supporters counter that casually mentioning what flavors different household members prefer is not a privacy violation, but a normal humanizing touch in lifestyle content. That debate reflects the wider difficulty of maintaining a consistent public position on privacy while running a lifestyle brand, which is almost definitionally built on selective personal disclosure. Now let's talk about Aston Villa, because it happened in the same week, and the contrast it created was very much part of what people were discussing across royal commentary. Aston Villa won their match. William, a longtime Villa supporter whose attachment to the club has been publicly documented for years, was there and was captured on video celebrating with entirely genuine enthusiasm. Filming the crowd, cheering alongside fellow supporters in the stands, fully absorbed in the moment in the way that football generates. That footage circulated widely, partly because Villa winning is significant in itself and partly because the joy in it was completely readable and infectious. And then, within the video, viewers spotted a moment where William's phone appeared to ring mid-celebration. He looked at it. He dismissed the call without answering. He went back to the celebration. That 3-second moment became its own viral talking point, completely independent of the match that had just been won. Comment sections across Twitter and Instagram immediately filled with jokes and increasingly creative theories about who might have been calling the future king in the middle of a football victory celebration and why the call was apparently not important enough to answer. The guesses were funny, creative, and shared widely. Memes spread rapidly. The moment took on its own life separate from the match itself. What made the Villa footage interesting beyond its immediate entertainment value is what it demonstrated about William's current public positioning and the specific quality of authenticity it conveyed. He was not performing relatability for a communications team's benefit. He was at a football ground, watching his team win, doing what a person does when their team wins. Filming, cheering, completely in the experience rather than managing an image of being in the experience. The phone dismissal resonated because it was entirely recognizable. Everyone has ignored a call when caught in the middle of something they did not want to step away from. The fact that the something in question was a football victory celebration made it more recognizable, not less. It was a specifically human moment, not a specifically royal one. Put the two moments side by side, as many commentators did in the same week. William at the football, laughing and dismissing calls, visibly living inside a moment. Meghan's as-ever account, beautiful scone footage, cream and jam and carefully arranged British tea setting, deliberately lit and composed and curated for maximum aesthetic effect. Neither of these things is inherently wrong. Lifestyle brands are supposed to be polished. Football celebrations are supposed to be spontaneous. But they communicate very differently about the person behind them and about the relationship between that person and the moment they are in. One looks like someone being caught living their life and occasionally having it filmed. The other looks like someone constructing a presentation of a life for a specific audience to receive. That gap is where most of the week's commentary found its foothold. What makes this moment genuinely interesting beyond the immediate scone debate is what it says about the longer-term positioning of the Sussex brand and about the viability of the original premise it was built on. The departure from royal life in 2020 was framed publicly as a liberation from institutional constraints, from the specific hierarchy that placed William and Catherine formally above Harry and Meghan in every ceremonial and public context, from the things about palace life that were described as harmful and restrictive. The explicit promise of the California chapter was that it would be different, that it would be on their own terms, that the brand they were building would stand on its own feet and not need to lean on the royal connection to justify its commercial presence. 5 years on, the brand is generating its most discussed moments in proximity to the royal world it departed from. The scone footage lands next to William's scone segment. Commentary about the royal hierarchy resurfaces in the coverage. The British imagery that critics associate with royal prestige keeps appearing in the brand's visual register. The most engaged discussions about as ever tend to be the discussions that have a royal dimension to them. Angela Levin's reading of this pattern, offered in commentary around the scone moment, is worth considering carefully even if you disagree with its conclusions. Levin has argued across years of royal coverage that Meghan found aspects of the royal hierarchy genuinely difficult to navigate. Specifically, the reality that Catherine's position as the wife of the heir meant she would always occupy a formally senior role within the institution, regardless of individual celebrity, public profile, or the size of anyone's media footprint at any given moment. William and Catherine were, structurally, the senior couple within the royal hierarchy. Harry and Meghan were the junior couple. That was not a negotiable arrangement. It was not something that could be changed by any amount of public attention, philanthropic work, or strategic image management, because it was determined by birth order and succession rather than by any variable the Sussexes controlled. Whether or not that specific psychological tension is what ultimately drove the departure, and Levin's broader observation that the brand continues to draw on imagery and cultural associations closely connected to the royal world, does not require that psychological reading to be valid on its own terms. The footage simply looks like it was shot in the aesthetic register of a certain kind of British prestige culture. Candlelit tea settings, fine china, cream and jam arrangements that belong to a specific social world. And that register is the one that the royal family has historically inhabited most visibly, most consistently, and most familiarly across the public's understanding of what that world looks like. The privacy dimension adds another layer that is worth acknowledging. In various promotional content around this period, As Ever's marketing incorporated casual references to household members' preferences, which flavors different family members' favor, what the domestic table looks like on a regular weekend. Critics pointed out that for a household that has consistently and publicly emphasized privacy, particularly around the children, casually weaving family details into commercial product promotion creates a specific tension. Supporters countered that mentioning someone's flavor preferences in a cooking video is not a privacy violation. The debate reflects the wider difficulty inherent in running a lifestyle brand while simultaneously insisting on privacy as a principle. Lifestyle brands are fundamentally built on selective personal disclosure, showing enough of a life to make that life feel aspirational and worth attending to. Claiming total privacy as a principle while simultaneously running a lifestyle brand is a structural contradiction that does not resolve itself, and it invites scrutiny every time a personal or family detail appears in promotional content, because it reopens the question of where the line actually is and whether that line is consistent or moves depending on what is being promoted. The Memorial Day timing added one more dimension that critics noted. The As Ever scone content arrived during an American holiday weekend when most Americans were at barbecues and outdoor gatherings, not British-style tea settings. The aesthetic mismatch between the holiday context and the content's visual register was noted, though whether that represents a strategic miscalculation or simply a timing coincidence, the brand did not account for depends on how much intentionality you ascribe to the post schedule. What the Scone Week demonstrated with unusual clarity is something that the previous months of As Ever coverage had been suggesting more gradually. The conversation around the brand is still being shaped more by the royal context than by anything the brand is doing entirely on its own terms. William's cream-first revelation generated several days of positive coverage, independently from its own momentum. Meghan's scone footage generated coverage primarily in response to William's. Its most discussed feature was its relationship to his moment, rather than anything the footage itself was offering. For a lifestyle brand trying to build its own distinct commercial identity and momentum, that is the more significant observation in this week's events. Not whether the timing was deliberate, not whether the visual choices reflected a specific intention, or were simply the natural output of a brand working in a certain aesthetic register, but whether the brand has yet arrived at a position where it generates its own cultural weather, where something from As Ever lands and creates its own wave of interest that does not require a royal-adjacent context to sustain it. The answer, based on the Scone Week and the preceding months of As Ever coverage, appears to be not yet. The brand's most engaged moments keep requiring that context. The coverage that spreads the furthest keeps finding the royal thread in what the brand puts out and pulling it. There are two possible readings of this, and they are not mutually exclusive. The first is that As Ever genuinely needs proximity to the royal story to generate sustained engagement, that the audience most reliably drawn to the brand is the audience interested in the wider Sussex and royal narrative, and that the brand has, consciously or not, calibrated itself toward that audience. The second reading is that the pattern is substantially created by media coverage rather than by the brand itself. That the commentary around as ever leans into royal comparisons partly because the people producing that commentary are professionally focused on the royal family, and that any lifestyle content produced by Meghan will be read through that lens regardless of its actual content. Both of those readings are probably partially true simultaneously. The honest answer is that the relative weight of each is very difficult to establish from outside the operation, and that the people inside it are probably not fully certain either. What is observable is the pattern of what generates the most coverage and engagement across the Sussex brand ecosystem. And that pattern consistently points back toward royal adjacency rather than away from it. That observation does not require any particular theory about intent to be valid. For the brand, the question that follows from the Scone Week is whether that represents a commercial asset or a commercial constraint. If proximity to royal news is what drives the largest engagement spikes, then orienting content to arrive during royal news cycles is a rational commercial strategy. But it is also a strategy that makes the brand permanently dependent on a news cycle it does not control and cannot generate independently. William's Scone moment was not planned to benefit as ever. It happened, and as ever benefited from arriving in its wake. The next William moment will happen on its own schedule, generated by whatever William does next that generates attention. And the brand will need to decide again what to do with it. That is a reactive commercial position, not a generative one. That dependency, the commercial need for royal adjacent context to generate peak engagement, is the real structural story of the Scone Week. Not whether the timing was deliberate. Not whether Angela Levin's psychological read of why the imagery keeps appearing is accurate. Not whether a lifestyle video about jam is royally inspired or simply a lifestyle video about jam. The real story is structural. A brand that was supposed to stand independently from the royal world is still generating its most discussed moments when it is closest to that world. And William, who created the original Scone moment by accident while laughing with radio hosts about his grandmother's cream preferences, and dismissing a phone call while watching his football team win, appears entirely unaware that any of this commercial and reputational analysis is happening around him, which is, in its own quiet way, the most telling detail of the entire week. The person whose presence generates the most significant reaction for the Sussex brand is the person who is doing the least to create that reaction and the least aware that it exists. Does the Scone moment represent a deliberate attempt to stay close to the royal conversation, or is it a pattern that develops naturally when a brand occupies this particular cultural space with this particular history? There is probably no clean answer, but the pattern exists across enough moments and enough months to be worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as coincidence. And it points somewhere worth thinking about. Drop your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next. And if this kind of close reading is what you come here for, the like button is how we keep it going. Next one incoming.